Captain Daniel Foster stepped out of the landing pod and felt the thick, humid air of Caro 7 hit his face like a wall. The jungle stretched out before him in every direction, a mass of green and brown that seemed to breathe with its own life. Behind him came the rest of the team, 3 alien species, each walking with the confidence of beings who had explored hundreds of worlds and never faced real danger. The Vex moved with stiff, calculated precision. Their tall bodies were covered in gray skin that seemed to shift in the light, and their eyes glowed with the faint blue of active neural processors. They carried devices that measured everything, analyzed everything, predicted everything. The Thorac warriors came next, their massive frames standing twice as tall as any human, their skin dark blue and covered with natural armor plates. They had fought in hundreds of battles and had never needed to worry about death, because their technology made them nearly impossible to kill. Last came the Silas diplomat Keppa, small and quick, with skin that rippled with color when he moved. He was young, barely an adult by his species standards, and this was his first real field mission. Daniel was the only human on the team. The 3 alien species had only recently allowed humans to join their exploration missions, and they did so with what Daniel thought was barely hidden doubt. They treated him like a child who needed supervision, like he might break if the wind blew too hard. He had trained for 5 years to join this expedition, but none of them seemed to care about that. "The atmospheric readings are stable," one of the Vex said, its voice like wind through metal pipes. "The temperature is optimal for our combined physiology. Proceeding with ecosystem survey as planned." Daniel nodded but said nothing. He had learned that the aliens did not like human input on matters they had already calculated. Instead, he moved to the front of the group and began checking his basic equipment. A knife, a flashlight, a communication device, and a small field pack with medical supplies. The aliens carried far more advanced technology, but Daniel preferred to keep things simple. Simple things were less likely to fail. The jungle grew thicker as they walked deeper inland. The sound of insects and unseen animals filled the air around them. Daniel could hear things moving in the canopy above, large things that made the branches shake. He pointed upward and turned to the group. "We should be careful. Large predators up there," he said. The Thorac commander made a sound that was almost like laughing. "Our sensors detect nothing of significant threat level. You worry too much, human. We have faced predators across 17 worlds. None have posed any real danger to a properly armed species." Daniel did not argue. He had learned that arguing with aliens who had databases and calculations and centuries of experience was pointless. Instead, he focused on the path ahead and the feeling in his gut that told him something was wrong. They came to a clearing where a stream ran through the jungle. The vegetation around it was trampled, not by small animals, but by something massive. Trees were snapped at the trunk, their wood still fresh and white where the breaks had happened. The ground was marked with deep claw marks, each one as long as Daniel's hand. "Something big comes here," Daniel said, pointing at the marks. One of the Vex moved forward and extended a sensor device. Blue light scanned the area. "The tracks are approximately 14 to 16 hours old. The creature responsible is likely a regional apex predator. Engaging database analysis." They stood in the clearing while the Vex processed information. Daniel could feel something pulling at his attention, a sensation from deep in his mind that told him they should leave. He had read about it in training. Ancient human instinct, the thing that had kept humans alive on Earth for millions of years before technology came along. Other species had evolved past those instincts, had replaced them with logic and calculation. But humans still had them, buried deep in their biology. "The database has a match," the Vex announced. "The creature is a Vreth, apex predator of Caro 7. Threat assessment, extreme. Combat rating of 87,000 compared to human combat rating of approximately 8,700. Recommended action: avoid the creature at all costs. Probability of defeating the Vreth in combat: 0.003%. The Thorak warrior shrugged. We do not need to defeat it. We simply avoid it. There is a different survey route we can take. Daniel looked at the claw marks again. Something about the pattern bothered him. The marks were not random. They showed a pattern of movement, a hunting behavior, and they pointed deeper into the jungle, toward where the team was headed. The tracks suggest the creature is territorial, Daniel said carefully. It might defend this area. If we go around, we should go wider. Much wider. The route we selected is optimal for data gathering, the Vex said. Deviation would result in incomplete ecosystem mapping. Probability of encountering the Vreth on the optimal route: 2.4%. Acceptable risk. Daniel said nothing more. He had learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing was being right while everyone else was wrong. They started moving again, following the stream as it wove through the jungle. Behind them, the Vex marked the location of the claw marks in their database, filed it away, and forgot about it. As they walked, Daniel could not shake the feeling that something was watching them. He had felt it on Earth when hiking in the mountains or through forests. That feeling of eyes on your back, the awareness that you were being observed by something that did not care if you lived or died. The aliens did not seem to feel it. Their sensors showed nothing. Their calculations said the risk was minimal. Their databases had never recorded a human casualty on this world. But Daniel knew something they did not. He had read the survival manuals, had studied the history of humans on dangerous worlds, had learned that the one thing human instinct could do better than any database was sense danger. While the aliens used logic to convince themselves they were safe, Daniel's body was telling him something very different. The jungle grew darker as the afternoon wore on. The canopy became so thick that sunlight barely penetrated. Strange bird-like creatures flew overhead, their wings making sounds that Daniel had never heard before. The stream grew louder, and soon they reached a waterfall where the water crashed down from a cliff above. "We make camp here," the Thorak commander said. "The waterfall provides fresh water, and the location is defensible if needed, though defense should not be necessary." As the aliens set up their advanced equipment, Daniel gathered firewood from the surrounding area. The wood was damp, but he found some dead branches that were dry enough to burn. He built a fire pit and got a small fire going. The aliens watched him with what he could only describe as pitying curiosity, as if they were watching a child perform a simple task with great effort. When night came, Daniel could not sleep. The sounds of the jungle surrounded the camp, and every sound made his muscles tense. The Thorak and Vex took shifts watching the perimeter using their sensors. But Daniel sat by his fire and listened to the night, and he heard something that made his blood cold. In the distance, carried on the wind, came a sound like nothing he had ever heard before. It was a roar mixed with a hunting cry, low and deep and filled with hunger. It came from the direction of the claw marks, the direction of the trampled trees, the direction of the Vreth. Daniel stood up. "We need to leave, now." The Thorak commander looked at him with something close to anger. "The sensors show the creature is miles away. We are perfectly safe. Sleep, human. Tomorrow brings more data gathering." Daniel did not sleep. He sat by the fire and waited for the dawn, and he tried not to think about what the Vreth was doing out there in the darkness, moving closer to the camping site with every passing hour. The morning came gray and heavy with moisture. Daniel had been awake all night, sitting by the fire and listening to the jungle. The other team members stirred slowly from their rest pods, their advanced technology feeding them nutrients and oxygen while they slept. They looked refreshed. Daniel looked like he had not slept in days. "Your human physiology is inefficient," the Vex observer noted as it scanned Daniel with its sensors. Your vital signs show exhaustion and elevated stress hormones. You should have rested. Something is coming, Daniel said simply. We need to break camp and move. Not on the original route. We need to go north, toward the mountains. The Thorac commander stood and looked at Daniel with open irritation. We have explored 17 worlds, human. We have never abandoned the mission because of vague feelings. The sensors show nothing. The calculations show the Vreth is still many kilometers away. We continue as planned. Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to grab them and drag them away from this place. But he knew it would do no good. So instead, he packed his gear and fell into line as the team moved out from the camp, continuing deeper into the jungle on the original path. They had been walking for 3 hours when the forest began to change. The sounds of insects stopped. The birds disappeared from the canopy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Daniel recognized the signs. Everything around them was running, hiding, getting away from something. Then the ground began to vibrate. It was not a strong vibration at first, just a tremor that Daniel felt through his boots. But it grew stronger with each passing second. The trees around them began to shake, and leaves fell from the canopy like rain. The Vex instantly activated their sensors, their eyes glowing bright blue as they processed information. Movement detected, the Vex said, its voice now tight with something that might have been alarm. Large creature approaching from bearing 240 degrees. Distance approximately 200 meters in closing. Recalculating threat assessment. The creature matches Vreth classification. Updating combat rating analysis. How long until it reaches us? The Thorac commander asked. Approximately 90 seconds at current velocity, the Vex replied. The trees in front of them exploded. Something massive crashed through the vegetation, and the Vreth emerged into the clearing where the team stood frozen. It was nothing like the calculations had suggested. Nothing like the database images could have prepared them for. The creature was easily 20 meters long from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail. Its body was covered in scales that shifted from dark green to black, and they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It had 4 powerful legs, each ending in claws as long as a human forearm. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth that looked like curved daggers. And when it roared, the sound was so loud that the ground shook beneath their feet. The Thorac warriors immediately activated their defensive shields. The Vex began tactical analysis, their processors running calculations at impossible speeds. But they did not move. They did not attack. They simply froze, their bodies locked in place by the weight of data that said this creature could not be defeated. The Vreth's eyes, large and intelligent and ancient, scanned the group. It was not interested in the warriors with their shields and their advanced weapons. Its attention focused on the youngest member of the team. Keppa, the small Silas diplomat, had backed away slowly and was now separated from the group by only a few meters. The Vreth moved toward him with terrifying speed. "Move!" Daniel shouted. But Keppa was already frozen in fear. The creature's muscles tensed, preparing to pounce, and Daniel understood with perfect clarity what would happen. The Vreth would kill Keppa. The warriors would not stop it because their calculations said stopping it was impossible. The end result was already written in their databases. But Daniel was human, and humans had a flaw that made them different from every other species in the galaxy. They did not accept the calculations. They did not read the data and surrender. They fought even when logic said fighting was pointless. Daniel ran directly at the Vreth. He did not have a weapon. He did not have armor. He did not have anything except his body and his voice, and the primal human refusal to watch someone die when he could do something about it. "Hey!" he shouted at the creature. "Hey, you want to eat something? Eat me." The Vreth's attention snapped to him. For a moment, the creature seemed confused, as if it had never encountered prey that attacked instead of running. Then hunger replaced confusion, and the apex predator of Caro 7 turned its full attention to the human dot behind him. Daniel heard the Thorac commander try to activate weapons. He heard the Vex calling out calculations, their voices confused and contradicted by the data they were receiving. They had never seen this before. Their systems were not prepared for an opponent who did the irrational thing, the impossible thing, the human thing. The Vreth charged. Daniel did not think about what would happen. He did not calculate odds or assess probabilities. He simply reacted, his body moving on instinct, older than civilization, older than technology, older than any database in the galaxy. He dove to the side, feeling the Vreth's claws pass so close that they shredded the sleeve of his suit. The creature roared in frustration and spun to face him again. Daniel scrambled backward, putting distance between himself and those teeth, those claws, that raw predatory power. But his eyes were working, analyzing the creature just like the Vex analyzed everything. He was looking for weakness, for error, for the one thing that separated a thinking creature from a data point. The Vreth lunged again, and this time Daniel did not run. He planted his feet, tensed every muscle in his body, and prepared to meet 4 million years of predatory evolution with one thing the galaxy had underestimated: human stubbornness. The creature's jaws opened wide, and Daniel threw himself to the side, rolling under the bite. He felt the snap of teeth pass inches from his head, and as he rolled, he saw his opportunity. For just a fraction of a second, the Vreth's jaw was locked open, and its neck was exposed. Daniel pushed off the ground with all the strength in his legs and drove his fist directly into the soft tissue of the creature's throat. The impact made a sound like thunder, and the Vreth's roar cut off abruptly. The creature staggered, confused and wounded, and for the first time facing prey that could hurt it. The warriors finally began firing their weapons, but Daniel barely heard the sound. He was already moving again, already fighting, already proving that a human with nothing to lose could be the most dangerous thing on any world. The data said he should have died already. The calculations said he had no chance, but Daniel Foster was still alive, and the Vreth was beginning to understand that it had made a terrible mistake. Daniel's fist had struck true, but the Vreth was far from defeated. The creature recovered from its momentary shock and turned its full fury on the human who had dared to wound it. What followed was not a clean fight. It was not a battle of strategy and tactics. It was raw, brutal survival, played out under the jungle canopy with the lives of others hanging in the balance. The Vreth slashed with its front claws, moving with a speed that should have been impossible for something so large. Daniel felt the air itself tear as the claws passed his face. He threw his hands up defensively, and the creature's talons tore through flesh and bone. Blood ran down his arms, but Daniel felt no pain yet. The adrenaline was too thick, too pure, flooding his system and shutting down everything except survival. He grabbed the creature's arm as it came at him again. His hands locked around the scaled muscle, and he pulled with everything he had. The Vreth tried to wrench free, but Daniel held on, using the creature's own momentum against it. He twisted his body and slammed the creature's arm into the ground. The impact shook the earth, and dust exploded outward in a cloud. The Thorac warriors were firing now, their weapons bright red beams that scorched the air and hit the creature's hide. But the Vreth scales were harder than diamond, and the blast barely left marks. The creature seemed almost to ignore the attacks, its entire focus locked on the human who was touching it, who was daring to wrestle with it, who was somehow still alive. The Vreth's tail came around like a whip, and Daniel had to release his grip on the creature's arm to avoid being struck. The tail missed him by centimeters, and the impact on a tree behind him snapped the trunk like it was a twig. Daniel rolled backward, his chest heaving, his lungs burning. Every breath was like fire in his chest. Increase weapons output. The Thorac commander was shouting. Divert power from shields and concentrate fire. But Daniel understood what the commander did not. The weapons were not working because this was not a problem that weapons could solve. The Vreeth's biology had evolved to withstand energy weapons. Its hide had developed over millions of years to be nearly impervious to any ranged attack. But there was one thing it had not evolved to withstand. It had never encountered a predator that could match its strength and would not accept defeat. Daniel lunged forward before the Vreth could attack again. He grabbed the creature around the base of its snout, his fingers sinking into the soft tissues at the corners of its mouth. The Vreth thrashed violently, trying to shake him off, but Daniel locked his legs around the creature's neck and held on with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. The creature reared up on its hind legs, lifting Daniel high into the air. He felt the skin on his hands begin to tear as the Vreth tried to pry him off. Blood mixed with sweat and dripped down his face. His vision was starting to tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. But he would not let go. The Vreth fell backward, trying to crush Daniel beneath its massive weight. He managed to roll to the side, and the creature's body crashed into the earth with enough force to topple the trees around them. The impact knocked the breath from Daniel's lungs, but he scrambled away before the Vreth could crush him again. They circled each other now, both breathing hard, both bleeding. Daniel's suit was torn in a dozen places, and blood soaked through the fabric. His right arm did not move properly anymore, and he suspected one of the Vreth's earlier strikes had broken bones. But he was still standing. He was still fighting. The Vreth learned quickly. It understood that pure strength was not enough, that the human would not be killed by being hit harder. The creature began to use tactics, began to anticipate Daniel's movements. It feinted to the left, and when Daniel dodged right, the creature was waiting. Its claws raked across his side, and Daniel felt ribs crack. He dropped to the ground and rolled under the creature's legs. This was a human advantage. The Vreth was built to fight creatures of its own size or larger. It was not built to face something that could move through the space beneath its body. Daniel came up behind the creature and drove his elbow backward as hard as he could into the soft tissue behind one of the Vreth's back legs. The creature roared and spun to face him. Daniel was already moving, using the jungle around him to his advantage. He grabbed a vine hanging from above and swung up into the lower branches. The Vreth pursued, crashing through the jungle and destroying everything in its path. But Daniel had learned the creature's patterns. Each time the Vreth attacked, he moved a fraction of a second before it arrived. Each time he was cornered, he found a way out. They fought this way for what felt like hours. The sun moved across the sky. Daniel's body screamed at him to stop, to surrender, to accept that he was human, and this creature was a predator beyond measurement. But his mind refused to listen to his body. Every time he thought about Keppa cowering in fear, every time he remembered the Thorac warriors frozen by calculation and doubt, something inside him pushed him forward. The Vreth was tiring. Daniel could see it in the way the creature's movements were becoming slower, less precise. The predator's respiration was labored, and blood was pouring from the wounds Daniel had inflicted. But the human was barely functional. He could barely see out of his left eye. His left arm hung useless at his side. He was held together by will and spite and nothing else. They came together one final time. The Vreth, growing desperate, made a mistake. It focused too much on its teeth, trying to use its bite to finish the human once and for all. And in that moment of focus, it left an opening. Daniel did not hesitate. He would not get another chance. With his remaining strength, he moved behind the creature and wrapped his arms around its neck. He locked his hands together across the throat and pulled with the force of every ounce of human determination that remained inside him. The Vreth thrashed and fought, trying to break free from this embrace that was choking the life out of it. Daniel held on. He held on when every nerve ending in his body was screaming for him to let go. He held on when his vision went black around the edges. He held on because if he let go, Keppa would die. If he let go, the aliens would go back to their databases and their calculations and believe that humanity was weak. If he let go, he would have died for nothing. The Vreth's movements began to slow. Its struggling became weaker. Its great strength, which had allowed it to dominate this planet for millennia, was useless against something that simply would not surrender. Finally, the creature's body went limp. The Vreth had lost consciousness, and Daniel Foster was still alive. Daniel released his grip on the Vreth's neck and collapsed backward onto the muddy ground. He could not move. He could barely breathe. For several long moments, he simply lay there, staring up at the jungle canopy, wondering if he was actually alive or if this was what death felt like. The Thorak warriors rushed toward him, their weapons finally falling silent. The Vex were running scans, their blue eyes glowing intensely as they processed information that contradicted everything in their databases. But it was Keppa who reached Daniel first. The small Silas diplomat knelt down beside the injured human and looked at him with eyes that had changed. There was no longer fear or doubt in those eyes. There was something else. Something that looked like understanding. Why? Keppa asked, his voice small and confused. Why did you do that? You should have died. The calculations showed that you should have died. Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Blood came up with the cough. Because you are not a calculation, he managed to say. You are alive. And alive things do not let other alive things die when they can stop it. The Thorak commander approached the unconscious Vreth and scanned it with their advanced equipment. The creature's vital signs are present but deeply suppressed. It will recover consciousness within several hours. We should secure it or kill it while it is helpless. No, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. We leave it. We take nothing. We move on. The Vex processor was working overtime, clicking and whirring as it tried to make sense of what had happened. Your actions violated logical strategy, the alien said. You engaged a creature with a combat rating 10 times your own. You had no weapons. You had no armor. Probability of success was 0.003%. And yet you survived. This does not align with our models. Maybe, Daniel said. Your models are wrong. The medical team arrived quickly, and they began the process of treating Daniel's injuries. He had 6 broken ribs, a fractured left arm, deep lacerations across both legs, and wounds on his torso that required immediate surgical intervention. But he had no internal bleeding, no organ damage, no injuries that would be permanent. The human body, it seemed, could endure far more than the aliens had believed as they worked on him. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness. He caught fragments of conversation between the team members, heard the tone of their voices change from dismissive to something else, something that sounded almost like respect. He fought the Vreth for nearly 3 hours, the Thorak commander said to the others. My weapons could not harm the creature significantly. The Vex tactical analysis failed. But this human, without weapons, without armor, without any advantage beyond pure determination, brought the apex predator down. The human physiology is more resilient than our databases indicated, the Vex said slowly, as if speaking the words aloud would help them make sense of the contradiction. Pain tolerance exceeds theoretical maximum. Muscle recovery capability is 47% higher than calculated. Mental fortitude shows no measurable limits. Keppa simply sat beside Daniel as the medical team worked. The young Silas did not speak. He simply watched, and his skin rippled with colors that Daniel's pain-addled brain could not quite process. They set up a proper medical facility at the crash site and brought Daniel back to the main camp. For 3 days, he slipped between consciousness and dreams. When he finally woke up fully, the team was waiting for him. The Thorak commander stood at the foot of the medical bed. The Vex observers stood nearby with their scanning equipment. But Keppa was closer, sitting in a chair right beside Daniel's pillow. "How do you feel?" the young Silas asked. "Like I was beaten by an apex predator," Daniel said, and was rewarded with what sounded like genuine laughter from the alien. "The team has been discussing what happened," the Thorak commander said. "We have reviewed all recorded footage and sensor data from the encounter. We have run calculations and simulations to understand how a human with your physical specifications managed to defeat a creature that we could not harm with advanced weapons." Daniel said nothing. He waited for what the commander would say next. "We were wrong," the Thorak said simply. "We underestimated humanity. We treated your kind as a curiosity, as creatures to be protected because they were fragile. But we were looking at the wrong measure of strength. We measured everything in terms of technology and firepower and physical durability. We did not measure the one thing that makes you dangerous." "What is that?" Daniel asked. "Refusal to quit," the Vex said, and there was something almost like wonder in the alien's synthesized voice. "Our databases say that every creature has a breaking point. We calculated your breaking point and believe you would reach it in combat with the Vreth, but you did not break. When the calculation said you should have fallen, you stood. When the analysis said resistance was impossible, you persisted. You are not the strongest. You are not the fastest. But you are the one who will not surrender." Keppa reached out and placed a small hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The humans saved my life," he said to the others. "Not because the calculations said he should, but because I was alive and in danger, and that was enough reason for him to act." The Thorak commander nodded slowly. "We have decided to change our protocols. Humanity will no longer be considered a protected species in need of supervision. You will be considered full participants in all exploration missions, with the recognition and respect that designation entails. You have proven what we should have known all along. Strength comes in many forms, and the strength to refuse defeat is worth more than 1,000 weapons." Daniel wanted to respond, but his body was exhausted, and sleep was pulling him down into soft darkness. As he drifted off, he heard Keppa speaking, the young Silas telling the others about the stories his people told about beings with hearts that could not break. And Daniel understood that something fundamental had changed in the minds of the aliens. They had come to this planet believing they were teaching humans about the galaxy, but it was humanity that had taught them something far more important. It had taught them that power measured in numbers and calculations could be defeated by something that had no number and no calculation, and had taught them about the human heart. Recovery took longer than anyone expected. Daniel spent 3 weeks in the medical facility, slowly regaining the ability to move his limbs without agony shooting through his body. The doctors were amazed by how quickly his human physiology was mending. Fractures that should have taken months to heal were solid within weeks. Muscles that had been torn were rebuilding with remarkable speed. It was as if the human body had been designed by some ancient force to overcome injury and damage through sheer stubborn persistence. During those weeks, Daniel received visits from the team. The Thorak commander came first, bringing data recordings of the entire fight. The warrior watched them with Daniel, analyzing each moment where the human had adapted, where he had learned from the creature's patterns, where he had predicted the Vreth's attacks and moved away just in time. "You are a tactical genius," the Thorak said finally. "You did not have the training or the weapons to defeat that creature, but you had something better. You had the ability to read the enemy in real time and adapt faster than calculation would allow. This is something our warriors are taught over many years of combat training. You did it instinctively. The Vex came next, with a team of scientists who wanted to study Daniel's physiology in detail. They scanned him, took samples, ran tests that Daniel did not fully understand. But their conclusions were clear and presented with something that almost sounded like humility. Human pain tolerance is biological, they explained. Your nervous system produces compounds that suppress pain sensation under extreme stress. Your muscle fibers have a secondary activation pathway that we had not predicted in our models. Your mental fortitude shows neurological patterns we have never encountered in any other species. Humanity is not weaker. You are simply different. And in this case, different proved superior. But it was Keppa's visits that meant the most to Daniel. The young Silas came every day, bringing food from the camp, sitting beside Daniel and talking about his home world, about his family, about his dreams for the future. And one day, as Daniel was finally well enough to sit up without assistance, Keppa told him something that made tears come to Daniel's eyes. My people live for 300 years, Keppa said. My children will hear the story of what you did. Their children will hear it. For the next 300 years, my family line will remember that a human gave his pain, his blood, his very survival to save a Silas he barely knew. That is not something that calculates to any number in any database. But it is the most important thing that has ever happened to me. 3 weeks after the fight, Daniel was well enough to walk around the camp with assistance. The team was preparing to leave Caro 7, their mission accomplished, though not in the way they had originally planned. The data about the Vreth had been recorded and transmitted to the Galactic archives. But the real data, the most important data, was about something else entirely. The Vreth had recovered consciousness 5 days after the fight. The creature was contained in a specialized medical pod, its vitals being monitored constantly. The team had debated what to do with the beast. Some wanted to study it. Some wanted to ensure it could not threaten other expeditions. But Daniel had a different idea. Release it, he told the commanders. It fought because that is what it is. It did nothing wrong. It was defending its territory, hunting for food, doing what apex predators do. Let it live. The Thorak commander considered this. The creature could kill others. It is a danger. Yes, Daniel agreed. But so am I, so is any living thing with teeth and claws and the will to fight. We are all dangerous. That does not mean we should not be allowed to live. In the end, they released the Vreth back into the jungle. The creature limped away, wounded and wary, but alive. And Daniel understood that this was important somehow. That letting the beast live was as much about what humans were as defeating it had been. On the day they left Caro 7, the entire team gathered to depart. The mission report was being compiled, and the preliminary findings were already being transmitted throughout the galactic community. The report included specifications of the Vreth, data about the planet's ecosystem, and recommendations for future expeditions. But it also included something new, an addendum about human capabilities. The Vex had rewritten their entire database entry about humanity. Where it once listed humans as fragile creatures needing protection, it now listed humans as creatures of remarkable adaptability and determination. The Thorak had recommended that all future military expeditions include human soldiers, noting that human tactical thinking was fundamentally different from their own and could provide advantages that pure calculation could not achieve. Even the Silas had transmitted a message to their home world, describing humanity in terms that sounded almost poetic. As the ship lifted off from Caro 7, Daniel stood at the viewing port and looked down at the jungle below. Somewhere down there, the Vreth was recovering from its wounds, licking the memories of a fight with something it had never encountered before. Somewhere down there, a predator that had dominated its world for millions of years had learned that there, were things more dangerous than teeth and claws. There was will. There was stubbornness. There was the refusal of a human to accept that any situation was hopeless. The Thorak commander joined Daniel at the viewing port. "Your people will change the galaxy," the warrior said. "Not because you are stronger, not because you are smarter, but because you do not think the way we think. You do not accept limits. You do not surrender to calculation. And in a galaxy that has become too predictable, too bound by logic and data, you are something new, something dangerous, something necessary." Daniel nodded but said nothing. He was thinking about Earth, about the long history of humans fighting against impossible odds, about all the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they refused to accept defeat. The aliens had treated humanity like a curiosity, a species to be studied and protected. But humans had always known the truth about themselves. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were the ones who would not quit even when the entire universe said they should. 3 months later, when the expedition returned to the galactic capital, they were greeted as heroes. But the hero was not the warrior aliens or the intelligent processors. The hero was Daniel Foster, the human who had fought an apex predator barehanded and won. News of what happened on Kara 7 spread throughout the known galaxy. For the first time, alien species began to understand what it truly meant to be human. They saw in the reports and footage that humans were not weak creatures hiding behind technology. They were beings with a core of steel, with a determination that could outlast any physical advantage. They learned that human mothers would fight armies to protect their children, that human soldiers would charge into certain death to save their comrades, that human hearts could love and sacrifice in ways that no algorithm could calculate. The Galactic Council called for a formal recognition of human abilities and status. The Vex updated their databases. The Thorak issued new military protocols. The Silas passed down the story of Keppa and the human named Daniel through their entire civilization. And Daniel Foster, recovered from his wounds and honored with medals and recognition he did not seek, understood something important. He had not just defeated an apex predator. He had changed how an entire galaxy understood strength. He had shown them that the measure of power was not in weapons or physical capability or technological advancement. It was in the refusal to surrender. It was in the will to fight for those you cared about. It was in the human capacity to do the impossible when those you loved were in danger. The report about what happened on Karo 7 would be studied for generations. Military academies across the galaxy would teach students about how a human defeated a creature 10 times more powerful. Scientists would study the recordings, trying to understand the mechanics of what they had witnessed. Philosophers would debate about the nature of strength and will and what it meant to be truly dangerous. But the most important lesson was the one that the aliens learned that day in the jungle. It was a lesson that no database could teach, no calculation could predict, no algorithm could program. It was the lesson that humanity had learned millions of years ago, the lesson that had allowed humans to survive on a harsh world filled with predators far more powerful than themselves. Never surrender. Never give up. And when someone you love is in danger, find the strength inside yourself that you did not know existed. Because that strength is the most dangerous and powerful force in the entire universe. That is what it means to be human.